Okay. We're going to get going in just a moment. We're letting folks come in from the waiting room, and it takes just a moment with Zoom. Looks like we've got a great group of folks joining. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's get started. Good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast or further west. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ted Wells. I'm Vice President, wear a lot of hats at STEM Connector, and excited to have this conversation today. STEM Connector is, as for those of you who are not familiar, we're a national organization. Our focus has always been on how to support the private sector in STEM education and advancing high impact, scalable programs, and also to advance equity. And we work with a number of corporations, but not just corporations and employers. We also work with nonprofit organizations that are national in their scope typically, and also work with colleges and universities, focusing on the entire age and stage of STEM workforce development. Today's discussion is on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know all of our esteemed panelists' hearts, as well as to many of you who are listening today. And that's focusing on the out of school time element of STEM and how that can be a huge driver of better outcomes across the space, and also can really help the most vulnerable students engage in STEM in really in dynamic ways. So today's conversation, and it's a fairly timely topic as we head into the summer months, where students are typically engaging more heavily in these out of school time experiences. But also this is something that we can do in terms of preparing for the upcoming school year in the after school space. So, as I've always thought about, as in my tenure at STEM Connector, I've thought about the out of school time space as a really great place particularly for employers to engage and to support STEM learning, because it's a lot easier to work with out of school time programs than sometimes it is to get into a school district. I remember when I was looking at volunteering in the DC public schools here a few years ago, and the amount of testing and paperwork and this and that I had to do just as an individual was somewhat overwhelming. And not to say that that's not worth it, but there are fewer barriers to entry in terms of working with out of school time programs. So that is a great advantage. I also think the flexibility, where you're not focused on a test and a curriculum and all these kind of things that happen in schools. Not that those aren't important, but sometimes it's a little bit more of a space where a company can kind of put its own mark down. As I said, it also is really important that schools, employers can work directly with students and NGOs to work directly, provide engagement with students, which is really appealing for a lot of employers. And there's just a big impact in working out of school time. I think about some of the most impactful experiences when you talk to STEM professionals. A lot of times those were yes, those in-school experiences were important, but the science fair, or perhaps it was the out of school time program during the summer that enabled them to research or pursue something that was of interest to them, or even a camp can be quite impactful in terms of helping people make connections to the world around them. So we have we have a very great panel today of speakers. I'm gonna call their names all out, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll move into some questions. We do have a chat window going, so please feel free to, I know my colleague Amy Edden is always rocking the chat window, so please feel free to drop your name in there, introduce yourself. Amy will also help us in terms of collecting questions that you might have. You can also use the question and answer feature that you should have to ask questions, and we'll try to answer them either at the end or if folks keep their eyes on them, the panelists do, they can maybe answer them in as we go through. So today we have three really esteemed speakers who I've worked with over the years, and really am excited to enable you to hear their voices. Teresa Drew is Deputy Director of the STEM Next Opportunity Fund. Heather Gonzalez is Vice President of STEM Education at the Museum of Science, which is located in Boston. And Robert Simmons is Dr. Robert Simmons is the Head of Social Impact at the Micron Gives Foundation, but has also a long history, a long tenure as a teacher and educator, and brings a lot of great insights. So Heather and Teresa, Heather and Robert, why don't you introduce yourselves very quickly? Teresa?
Well, we'll just jump right in. Hi, Ted. Teresa Drew, again, Deputy Director at STEM Next Opportunity Fund. We have a mission to bring high quality STEM learning to millions of young people across the country. And we do that through a few different interesting and pretty effective approaches, which I'm happy to share with you all today. And I'm thrilled to be joined today for this conversation with Heather and Robert, and really honored to be here with all of you today. Thanks.
Heather?
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Ted. Heather Gonzalez, Vice President of STEM Education for the Museum of Science, Boston. And my role there is really leading our national curriculum, EIE. So the Museum of Science in Boston has a pre-K through grade 8 engineering computer science curriculum, both in school and out of school. And my role is to take that nationally. I'm super excited to be here with STEM Connector and Teresa and Robert to talk about the out of school time. So thank you.
And Robert.
I'm excited to be here. Robert Simmons, I'm the Director of Social Impact and STEM Programs at Micron. And we are currently in the midst of Chip Camp. So it's an exciting opportunity to talk about some of the work that we're doing. We believe that our focus is on exciting young people around STEM, but also we have as a core part of our mission, reaching underrepresented groups in STEM, women and girls, Black and Latinx folks, Indigenous communities, and certain subsets of Southeast Asian young folks, as well as ensuring that we extend our support into geographically isolated communities in our country. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, everybody. Well, Teresa, you guys STEM Next is a real systems-based organization. And you guys have went back to the days of the Noyce Foundation, have a tremendous track record of supporting out-of-school time STEM programs. Wondering if you could perhaps take that expertise and help our audience sort of understand what the landscape of out-of-school time, or OST, is overall, and what the opportunity is, and then particularly as that relates to out-of-school time or OST STEM.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ted. Happy to talk about out of school. And I will say, as I was listening to you do the introduction and framing for today's conversation, I started thinking my favorite thing about out of school learning spaces is that it's fun. We've got the flexibility, the ability to be nimble, but it's a really fun space with caring adults who are there to create a space of nurture and care. And so, what more could you ask for than a fun learning experience, right? So I have a few slides that I wanted to share today as we're getting a little understanding around the out of school space. And when I'm talking about out of school learning, I'm talking about after school and summer programs, camps, libraries, museums, rec centers, clubs, you name it. Learning beyond the classroom is the learning space that I'm talking about today. So what we know is that STEM and out of school time really is a missed opportunity, and with a growing need for youth. So while we have a lot of really great STEM out of school time programs, I do think there's a moment in time that we have right now to capture, and together we can do that. STEM subjects are viewed differently from other subjects by parents who place the most emphasis on reading. And we see STEM instruction in school shrinking, with elementary students spending only about 20 minutes per day on science. The pandemic widened existing opportunity and achievement gaps, hitting historically disadvantaged students hardest. In math, students in majority Black schools ended the 2021 school year with 6 months of unfinished learning. Students in low-income schools with 7. And while we wholeheartedly agree that more STEM needs to be embedded into core curricula offered in schools, kids only spend about 20% of their time inside the classroom. Schools alone cannot make up for that unfinished learning. And that's where we all come in. Next slide, please. Research shows that what happens outside of the school can be equally as important as what happens inside in terms of activating students' STEM interests, identity, and attitudes, and for building STEM career awareness. This is why it's so important for all of us to partner with corporations who really care about this. And Afterschool is a perfect environment for STEM because it gives youth a safe space to explore and experiment without fear of failing or being graded. Oh, and it's fun. Next slide, please. So for these reasons, at STEM Next, we lean into Afterschool in summer. It's a fertile, nimble system that can respond to the changing needs, level the playing field for underrepresented youth, and it's where we can make the most difference now and in the long run. And as I mentioned, 80% of learning happens outside of the classroom, but not every kid has access to high quality out of school learning experiences that give them that leg up. And in fact, there is actually a 6,000 hour learning gap between youth from low income households and their upper and middle income peers. By 6th grade, that out of school time learning gap adds up to equivalent of 5 years of school. And while STEM and after school is growing, we still see access disparities within programs, with high income kids having access and frequency to STEM activities than low income families. To close this gap and unlock the potential of millions more kids, we partner with the largest youth serving organizations like the 50 State After School Network, which I'll tell you more about, to reach 100,000 local after school and summer programs across the country and upwards of 10 million youth to build their interest, identity, STEM skills, and more. By fully utilizing the hours outside of school and taking an all hands on deck approach to maximize our collective power, we can ensure that our students are better prepared for our future. And we do that in partnership with organizations like the Museum of Science and corporations like Micron. And I can talk more about after school too, if you want me to, Ted.
All right, that's good. I didn't know you had more. All right, thanks so much.
For now.
That's good. Awesome. Well, this is the piece that I really like that STEM Next is doing is building this infrastructure to help support, to enable stakeholders locally to develop programs that work for them, but are also based in evidence. So it's not like a top-down. It's a top-down, bottom-up approach that really is, I think, we are discovering across a variety of sectors, not just education, enables people to have their own touch on things, but also enables that infrastructure. So, and I love the fun piece because I was a teacher, and I will say that the most fun experiences I had working with students were in the out of school time setting. So, particularly in summer camp, I remember having a good time hiking. Looking more at like a community-based institution that also has a national reach, Museum of Science. Heather, I know you guys have a lot of curriculum resources that can scale nationally, like engineering is elementary. When we think about a museum, we also think about a physical presence. If anybody's been to Boston, they know right in the middle of the Charles River sits the Museum of Science. It's a pretty unmistakable place. And I'm wondering if you could provide some background on, sort of these different outlets that the museum has and how you can connect with different audiences and students to help support STEM learning in the out of school time space.
Sure, absolutely, Ted. And, to echo what Teresa said, right? Out of school time is about fun learning. STEM can be fun, it's engaging. And, at the Museum of Science, we really see ourselves as conveners. We think about the physical location, community programs, and educators. We all work with community partners and industry leaders to really bring the programs of the museum to communities. And magic really happens when those community partners, industry leaders, and our teams work together to define programs that meet the needs of the communities we're serving. So that's really when I say, think about the museum as a physical location. It is about bringing industry leaders in, communities in, giving the space for these programs to actually happen. And if I flip a little bit to think about our national curriculum, EIE, we have developed several units of out of school time curricula, which were specifically designed and tested for out of school time environments. That's summer school, after school, and they were built upon the research around our engineering as elementary design principles for inclusivity. The way that EIE really works with industry partners is a few different ways. One of which is really having industry leaders support the implementation and training of our programs in after schools or summer programs. An example of that is, Analog Devices is funding and implementation in Fall River, which is a Title I district in Massachusetts, where they're using our out of school time Engineering Everywhere program this summer with their kids. Another model of engagement is really where we partner with industry leaders to create products. And one example is we're currently working with Akamai Technologies to create a series of cybersecurity activities. And we're getting their employees involved and engaged in that product development process by having employees create videos, quotes, reviewing of materials. So it's really a collaborative engagement. So the museum is a convener. The national curriculum is to really engage kids in STEM learning, and industry partners can support that through, sponsoring the products into the schools.
Awesome. That's great. Fall River is right near where I'm from, in Rhode Island. So very familiar with Fall River. Great. Robert, turning to you with your hat as a career educator who's now moved into the role as a funder supporting Micron's social impact strategy, which is, I'm sure, a bit of a paradigm shift. But can you, say that, from your wearing your hat now at Micron and Micron Gives and the amazing team that you work with, can you say why out of school time is such an appealing venue for engagement? I know you guys have your chip camp. You can talk about that.
Yeah.
But also just sort of some of the other spaces that Micron supports.
Yeah, first, I just want to celebrate those who are closest to the pain of many of the tragedies that young people have faced recently, but also acknowledge Pride Month and Juneteenth and all the ways that people show up in our society as they engage with STEM. So I think that being the son of civil rights activists, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I did not acknowledge where we are as a society. I think for the work that we're doing at Micron, one of the things that is important is not just our STEM outreach work, but also supporting system building and movement building around STEM, right? And part of what we're doing in many of our partnerships with NMSI, the National Math and the Science Initiative, Hidden Genius Project, one of our newest partners, STEM from Dance, is really looking for innovative ways to partner with organizations that are going to take STEM to the community, as opposed to the community coming to STEM, right? And what I mean is that one of the barriers in particular for those who are most at the margins systemically and historically is an access to quality out of school time programs. And one of the things that's important is Audre Lorde once said, without community, there is no liberation, right? And it's important to keep in mind that without this idea of community, we will never ensure that all young people from all walks of life have access to quality STEM program. And then at Micron, through our work and our STEM outreach, that's one of the things that we're doing. The other thing I'll say is that as a career educator, as a middle school teacher, principal, district administrator, one of the things that I find really important and is my challenge to other folks in STEM disciplines is understanding the need to intersect racial academic identity development and STEM identity development, right? It's just not only the content of STEM that's important, but it's also having a belief system that you belong there. And this idea of ensuring that young people feel good about themselves when they step into the space where they might be the only person who looks like them or is from their neighborhood, working at Apple, working at Micron, or going to college and being in a STEM course. So it's important to keep that in mind. I had the great privilege of meeting one of my mother's classmates who went to Spelman at the very beginning of the 3-2 program between Spelman and Georgia Tech. And she was the first Black woman to graduate with a degree in engineering from Georgia Tech. And one of the things she said to me is that there are things that Georgia Tech could learn about how to love and nurture Black students in STEM and engineering. So I think that there needs to be deeper collaborations between institutions where we have deep, thoughtful conversations, not singularly about content, but how do we embrace and love students into STEM, through STEM, and through their careers.
Amazing. Yeah, I know, Robert, I don't know if you're familiar with the research that Gallup did in partnership with Excellency in Education around students who attended historically Black colleges and universities, and like a lot of factors around happiness following graduation versus students, their counterparts who did not experience the excellencia.
Right.
Well, that, you know, HBCUs have just such a great track record of supporting students' self-esteem and sense of purpose and building community.
That's
and
right.
That's important. And after school STEM, out of school time STEM provides that. I don't know how many students who I encountered who, you know, identified the camp that they went to in the summer as like the most, one of the singular most identifying things, or you know, the place that they went out of school time. Everybody goes to school. That is a way to differentiate yourself and have a unique experience. Thank you, Robert. That's great. And also welcome. I see some familiar faces in the chat rooms. So the chat rooms are great. Thanks. Keep introducing yourselves, and please keep asking questions. I see a couple kind of are coming on there. So thank you very much. And please feel free to share any links, resources, you know, to materials that you think would be of interest in this space. I'm going to keep moving around and back to Teresa. And I love that STEM Next has developed, you know, the Million Girls Moonshot program, and has just done a lot of research and partnerships with Mott and other organizations to help build capacity for stakeholders to deliver a high quality program and equity-based programming in the out of school time space. Can you talk about some of these partnerships and especially with corporations, and how did you know, what were the corporations kind of looking for, whatever you can share, because I think this is a really interesting space to think about for corporations, because sometimes they're like capacity building. I mean, you know, it's sort of, I need people now. And how can you, you know, what does that look like for that type of partnership?
Thanks. Well, it's definitely a little complex, but you know, what's great about having the infrastructure by working with the after school networks is that we're able to, you know, there is an established kind of system of support within the out of school space. So all 50 states have a network, and within those networks are many programs who the networks are working with to ensure that there's quality STEM learning going on, and that the programs have access to the different resources that they might need. So we work through that infrastructure so that we're able to have a scale and reach across the country. As you mentioned, Ted, our flagship kind of effort right now is the Million Girls Moonshot Initiative. And our partnerships, our partners, especially working with corporations, it's a perfect example of how our work comes together within a system, working with lots of different partners. So meaning the organizations, the programs on the ground, the after school networks, the state departments of ed. We bring in our policy fellows to make sure that the information is, you know, whatever they might need in terms of funding streams. But it's really like looking at the whole system and ensuring that there's a connected pathway for young people to continue on their STEM journey once they're sparked. So we launched the Million Girls Moonshot in 2020. It's right in March, right at the beginning of the pandemic. It is a national 5-year initiative. It's an $18 million collective impact initiative to get 1 million more girls engaged in STEM. I think one thing that's really unique about this initiative is that we do not reinvent the wheel, meaning we don't create our own content or curriculum. We partner and we leverage existing infrastructures. We work on and taking proven programs to scale and leveling up our programs, those programs across the country with the strategies that we know work best for girls and kids from marginalized communities. One of the things that we have heard from our corporate partners is that there's a struggle sometime with balancing joining a national initiative and demonstrating the impact in their local communities where they have a strong business presence. But for us, if we're really serious about addressing equity in STEM, some of the points that Robert was just speaking to, and inspiring that next generation of innovators to fuel the workforce of tomorrow, it requires investments in both approaches. So I'm going to use our partner, one of our corporate partners is Qualcomm. They're a local company in San Diego, which is where I am, and it's great. We have them in our backyard. They are a huge champion of STEM programming going on in San Diego. But, you know, I'm using them as an example, but what about the kids who are in rural Mississippi where there is not a Qualcomm and they're not investing locally? So it takes an and in both, because if we're able to invest in a national initiative that is working with many partners who have quality program, like Museum of Science in Boston, elementary is engineering is elementary, their curriculum is phenomenal. And getting that out is a benefit to everybody across the country, regardless of where you're at. So it's an and in both approach. I think we can do it all, but it takes these strategic partnerships, really, like where we're looking at the system. Where are the gaps? Where are the holes? How do we fill them and plug them and leverage each of our existing assets together? So we bring through the Million Girls Moonshot a variety of, you know, experts, partners with content and curriculum. We scale those programs and opportunities for learning, professional development for all the way from frontline staff to program directors, site directors, and then state and regional leaders. So we know that these, and it's like across grades, right? It's not just one time, because the kid who's, you know, goes to a summer camp and it's so awesome and they're like really excited, well, then what happens next? You know, if they don't have anywhere else to go on their next opportunity, or, you know, then they get to school and they're challenged passing algebra. Well, we have to provide a holistic support system for that young person where everywhere they go, they walk out their front door, they can go to the museum, they can go to school, they can go to their before school program, and they're getting support, encouragement, access to high quality opportunities that are not cost barriers. And we have to make the commitment, I think, nationally, that all kids, that we are going to commit to this. And that's what the Million Girls Moonshot is doing.
Yeah, awesome. It's great. It's really got to tie, everything's got, you know, if you don't tie it together, you know, it's hard. And yeah, it was interesting last week, or 2 weeks, I can't keep track of time anymore. It was last week. My colleague Renee, Aaron, and I were out in Colorado for a workshop, and we listened to the college president from Colorado State Pueblo, which is a small institution, a really, really awesome little school down in a Hispanic serving institution in Southern Colorado. And Tim Motet, who's not listening today because he's out of the country, but on vacation, but he inspired us by, you know, some observations he had about education right now. And I think that the last couple of years have really given students some pause as to what the value of education is. I mean, if you think about, like, this was school and think about your mind, like what we're doing right now was school, you might, you know, this was not stimulating. And even for students for whom the in-school experience would be good, a lot of students became disillusioned. So there's more questioning right now of the value of education among young people at every age and stage, frustration. And I think that you're right, that this out of school time space enables students to make those connections, but you do need to be intentional on the back end and making sure that those connections are nurtured and fostered. So let's go to Heather. I want to ask you, Heather, a little bit more about this. You know, you guys are, to what Teresa's point, you know, in New England, this huge area. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I grew up there, but it's like 30 million people or something are up in New England. and it's a big area in terms of population, and a lot of diversity economically and diversity of demographically. And you play this really critical role in supporting an ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about how the partnerships that you've had with industry in the ecosystem are able to support out of school time learning across the region? I remember things like, I'm sure this is forever ago when I went to school, but you do your field trip to the Museum of Science, which you would look forward to at different grades. But there's more to it than that. The ways you guys are contributing, you're enabling corporations to have employers, let's not just say corporations.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One example that comes to mind is really our shifting strategy around community, right? And we welcome industry and community partners into the museum and host experiences. One example is, iRobot is working with communities that actually the museum hopes to reach. And in partnering with organizations like iRobots and hosting an event, coding competition with local school districts at the museum, we're giving children safe spaces, interesting programming. We have a continued partnership with that particular organization, and are looking to continue to host competitions next April with teams of students across the New England area with these same community partners. So, in this example, iRobot has the community connections, and we're working with them to really have them bring those groups to the museum in a new and different way, using our space, again, as a convener, right? As a convener of the community. And it creates a welcoming and sense of belonging for youth in the area. If I flip to our curriculum, a example of how we are reaching into the New England STEM ecosystem is through a partnership with Hall neighborhood in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a area that is, I would say, underserved, underrepresented. Their director knew of EIE, reached out, had a great conversation. They have an amazing initiative to continue to get STEM in their community centers. They came to the museum, participated in one of our certified educator institutes. So we enabled them to be able to go back and take the pedagogy and the curriculum back to their community centers. And I think they're being funded by local organizations and federal grants. So it's really, about just reaching into this ecosystem and, from a STEM learning standpoint for curriculum, training, facilitators, educators, so that they can take that knowledge back into their communities and their organizations and work with their school groups.
I love that. Yeah, it really is that you're creating what Teresa just spoke to. It's in practice, so that's great. I love to hear that students are getting great opportunities up in where I grew up and everywhere too. Robert, thank you very much, for pointing out Juneteenth is Sunday, and very important holiday. I'm pleased to see we actually were, it's a federal holiday, which is exciting. And also, Heather, you've got the pride flag in the background there from the museum, and thanks for supporting, and also Robert for mentioning the Pride Month. And a lot of these, as a young gay kid in New England, I would not have, certain out of school time activities were not friendly, and I wasn't, I think that this is an opportunity to really support students who, are looking for a safe space, but also to help them engage in learning and developing some of those critical social emotional learning capabilities that will enable them to deal with folks that are perhaps intimidating or bullying them. And then also from corporations, 2 years ago, we were in this time, or right around now, I guess, everybody was talking about equity and the importance of equity. But sadly, that conversation is, as often is the case, is starting to fade. And so I know that I can guarantee you that 99.9% of everybody on this webinar understands and feels viscerally the importance of embedding equity into STEM outreach program. But oftentimes, if you're confronted with a why equity, why is it important? Wondering if you speak so passionately about this, and that's a big difference. People are passionate about it, but they are not as effective at communicating as you are. Wondering if you can share why it's so important for corporations to support equity-based STEM programming.
Yeah, listen, like you want to go find folks to help corporations make money. Like, let's just cut right through all of the platitudes. Like, corporations exist to have revenue, but they're also corporations that exist to do good in the world, right? So I think the two can go hand in hand, right? But in order to ensure that corporations are doing good in the community, you also have to look like the communities, right? The communities that you serve in terms of who your employees are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And one of the things I always say is that brilliance and superior intellect is not the domain of a particular zip code or a type of person. Brilliance and intellect is equally distributed across our society, right? However, access and opportunity are not, right? And what we know is that it is a statistical fact that the more diverse your workforce is, the more diverse your C-suite is, the more diverse your board is, the greater the likelihood is that you can solve complex problems. The faster you can solve complex problems, it means you reduce your expenditures, because if you total up the salaries of people in a room to solve complex problems, and if it takes you 20 days when it could take you 2 hours, you've wasted money, right? So you can go with that piece. The other piece is it's the right thing to do. We have a system that has marginalized particular subsets of people because of policies, laws, and individual behaviors, right? Institutional racism, institutional sexism, systemic racism, systemic xenophobia, et cetera, and individual attitudes and behaviors marginalize people. It is time for us to realize what our democracy really should do, and it requires a lot of work. It's uncomfortable for some folks, right? Because it requires difficult conversations. And it requires a shift away from conversations that center, well, we just need to do it for everybody. And that may be true, but unfortunately, our approach to doing things for everyone in our society hasn't reached everyone, right? So we have a lot of groups of people that are marginalized. And I think out of school time programs that are well done, that allow for young people to have access and opportunity, help offset some of the challenges school districts face, because we cannot leave the burden to deal with opportunity and access gaps to teachers alone, right? Teachers are some of the greatest warriors for justice in our society, right? All great democracies are known and remembered for how well we educate our children. The question that we have as a society, are we all willing to take this on as a collective and support educators, principals, administrators in their work and doing this together? And it is my challenge to other corporations and other universities for us to step into out of school time space, not as people who know everything, but also as willing learners from practitioners in this space. Because it's different. You can be a great engineer, but that doesn't mean you can teach someone about engineering, right? So it's important to understand, like, you have to be able to step into it and learn from out of school time practitioners and educators, so that as corporations are doing STEM outreach, that our STEM outreach aligns with best practices in education.
Awesome, Robert. Thank you so much. That was great. And I totally agree with that all the points you made. And I love that last point you made about making sure that we do have professional development or we have some type of formation for folks that are going to work with kids. I remember talking to a large, I won't say the company because it doesn't make them look good, but a large company in the financial services world. And they were talking about a financial services literacy curriculum. They were just going to hand it to their accountants and go. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, even on the best day, accounting to me is not the most exciting thing, or financial literacy. And then, people who do that for a living are not known for their acumen around children. So you're really rolling the dice in terms of the outcome that you're going to get. I just got word. So we're partnering with STEM Next with 3M gives on a grant. We're really excited to work on it, and to look forward to releasing this later this year. But we just got word that we're going to be, we had a good kickoff meeting yesterday to discuss this, but we're going to be looking at programs and employee engagement, and how employee engagement actually can have an impact, not only on the social, the objectives that the social outcomes that you're looking to impact, objectives that you're looking to pursue, but can also have an impact on the employee's satisfaction and performance. Because that's also an important piece, I think, for companies is, employee volunteers can actually, it's not just a one-way street. They actually feel more connected to their community. They are able to connect with young people, understand education more effectively, maybe even improve communication skills in the workplace, and also feel like they have a purpose in the work that they do. And the Jackie Berry at 3M was saying, she's like, we don't have the most, we're working on having a more diverse STEM workforce, but we do have a lot of folks that are feel like, well, should I go work with marginalized communities, and they're not from a marginalized community? It's like, of course. She's like, of course, yes, you should. But she's like, that it's everybody's role to go out in the community and work. And I think it's for companies, STEM companies have a pretty bad record of being able to recruit diverse STEM talent. We see that as a big indicator. The outcomes of the education system and impact reflect that we just don't have a diverse STEM workforce. It's a goal, it's an aspiration, and we're working towards it, but there still is a lot of work to do. And this work, I think this is a big lever. I think that's what the conversation today is getting to. One piece I think that is really interesting is, in the last couple of years, we've been talking, I'd love for everybody to sort of chime in on this, is, one of the big determinants of outcomes has been, is not just, if you're going to look for investing in STEM workforce outcomes, it doesn't mean that you just spend all your money in science, technology, engineering, and math. It also means, you need to look at, developing social and emotional learning. Wondering if you guys could speak to a little bit about how the work that you're doing is advancing social and emotional learning, what that looks like, what maybe your perspective as a practitioner in the space is on how to kind of bring all those pieces together. Anybody can go for it.
I'll jump in. Well, one, Robert, I just want to 100% agree with everything you just said. I was like sitting here trying not to like jump out of my seat. So wanted to just say that. But I think one thing that's really special about the out of school space is this ability to meet young people and educators where they are. And Heather, you kind of talked about this too. I'll use the moonshot as an example. We have an array of research-based practices and strategies that we know work. But one of the things that overrules all of it is listening and learning from the people who are actually trying to help shift practice so that mind shifts occur. So those are shifts in the way adults are thinking, young people are thinking, and it starts with creating this safe space where a young person feels socially and emotionally secure. They can have a foundation of sense of belonging that the educators are cultivating, the learning space is cultivating, the young person is adding to, and we're listening to them. We're listening to the young people. They have something really important to say. We need to make sure that we're listening and designing, programs and experiences with young people, with the community in mind. And to me, the out of school space is very conducive to creating a reflective learning opportunity from the community. We can tap into that. There's that inherent flexibility and nimble aspect, Ted, that we talked about at the top of the hour, and working together to create this, and rooted in those youth development principles, we're creating a space that is fostering a sense of social and emotional comfort, self-esteem, and building allows for that ability for a young person to build their STEM identity. I mean, it's if we focus on the good, on those parts about out of school and look at the whole practice, we will hit our mark.
Awesome. That's great.
I would completely agree with that, Teresa. I don't know that I have much more to add to it. I think you've said it beautifully.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think that the SEL piece is important, but I also think going deeper is just ensuring that young people they see what we want them to become, right? And I always say to folks, like, there's things need to run in parallel in this space. So our desire to have more underrepresented young people going into STEM has to run in parallel with wanting to increase the diversity of the teaching force. So we want more Black and Latina folks in STEM or Indigenous folks. You need more of them in classrooms because we understand statistically, and it's quantifiable, the impact that 1 year with the same race teacher can have. It doesn't mean that white teachers can't educate students of color. It's just to suggest that we have demonstrated results that the more diverse our teaching force is, the greater the likelihood is that young people will not only go into STEM, but will persist in STEM fields, right? And I think that it's super important to run things in parallel as opposed to seeing things as being really tangential. And it's the same argument I have with folks about why it's important to co-construct with literacy professionals STEM curricula, right? Because if you can't read, you can't do STEM, right? It doesn't work in the reverse order. As someone who was a STEM teacher, I would love to think that STEM is the most important thing. But the fact of the matter is that young people, in particular, young people of color who have higher rates of literacy stand a less likelihood of becoming integrated into the school to prison pipeline. Not whether they can do STEM, but whether they can read, right? So we have to have this acknowledgement that in order for all of this to work together, we need to make sure that we're co-constructing things with folks and figuring out ways to not have petty arguments about whether it's STEM or STEAM, right? Like, use arts to get kids engaged with STEM. Like, what difference does it make? Like, it's like, what are we talking about here, right? If you like to beatbox and you love hip hop, guess what? I'm gonna get a beat machine and we can do all sorts of mathematics and STEM from a beat machine and hip hop, right? And it's important to understand that hip hop is a form of science, right? It's also a form of literacy. So how do you integrate those things to engage young people that have been marginalized by society? And that's also important as we think about SEL. So I just think there's a lot of work to do, but also from the corporate philanthropy side, it's important for us to really understand the ways in which STEM is an instrument as a tool, not just for young people going into STEM fields, but for them to have significant outcomes and opportunities in life in general. And I, would say my critique of corporations is that they're like, oh, well, we need to invest in such and such a nonprofit because they're going to help us recruit more employees from underrepresented groups. For me, yeah, that's important, but I also want young people to just be happy, right? Because the happier young people are, the better they'll do in school, and the greater likelihood that we can continue to push forward with the animation of an effective democracy.
Awesome. Great points, everybody. I think that one of the troubles I see with STEM is effective STEM learning requires failure and repeated failure. And, so when students who are marginalized are enter into STEM fields, if like, this is another place I'm gonna fail and it's gonna stink. Like, why are you gonna, that's just a factor. That's one more thing that can draw folks away from persisting.
Ted, I think that's where good curriculum comes into play, right? Going back to what Robert and Teresa were saying as well, is practitioner, the professional development, helping the educators understand how to handle those situations. Thinking about curriculum that is developed and rooted, Robert, in literacy, STEM curriculum that is developed carries a narrative context throughout that shows representation of children in 18, 20 different countries, right? So children can see themselves in STEM. Equally as important, 100% agree with you about fixing the teacher shortage and getting educators who are more representative of all of our children. But I also think that there is a real place for curriculum and doesn't have to be reinvented, to Teresa's point earlier, right? There's stuff out there that exists that is really good, that is research-based, that's backed. And we, as a whole team and nation, need to figure out, how do we put these together, corporations, partners coming together, allowing for a greater impact in our schools and OST places.
And Ted, can I jump in too? I'm sorry. We want to just keep talking. It's so exciting. But I think this is a good spot too, where when we think about corporate partners, how does a corporate partner help us, in our effort? One, we know that young people need role models and mentors. And, this is a great role that a corporation can fill. So if we don't have as diverse of an educator population as we need, well, we can actually, there are some amazing STEM professionals out there in all the corporations that have joined the call today, and people who really want to give back and share and tell their story and have a positive influence on a young person. So we know that that's important. Our other partners know that that is important. And one of the things that we're working on in the Million Girls Moonshot and prioritizing is, how do we provide opportunities for our corporate partners to fill those roles as role as a role model or a mentor, and connect in a meaningful way with an after school or out of school program. So we are about to launch a new volunteer engagement platform that will help us connect the nonprofit and out of school, after school programs directly with our corporate partners. And then also provide the supports and capacity training for the volunteers, and then for the nonprofits to effectively engage with a corporate volunteer, so that it is an experience that is mutually positive and beneficial for all.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was really helpful. I'm going to look at some of these questions that have come in from folks. I do see one question about NSF equity and STEM education grants. I'm going to actually, from Elizabeth Arafati, that would actually, my colleague Cindy Zeiker has been doing a lot of work in the NSF equity and STEM. So I might see if Cindy is able to answer those and maybe do that offline, or we could include that. Cindy is the master of NSF. And getting around, particularly in the equity and STEM grants, and includes grants. So this one about, I do like the one about selection of partners, and I do think that that's something you all can kind of weigh in on, because you've been on every side of this. But I do, workforce readiness is like, this is, I know, at the end of the day, we do want, as we look at outcomes, we want students to be able to provide for themselves, to have a potential career, and have skills in the workforce that are going to be marketable, so that they can earn a living and to grow in their career and provide for their family, and all these goals that we think about in terms of being an adult. So out of school time is very appealing to incorporate workforce readiness. What do you think? How does it, in your estimation, how does that manifest itself in an out of school time programming? And let's go pretty quick so we can get to these other ones too. But if you can give me just a couple of sentences.
For Micron, it just means investing and supporting through our philanthropic efforts, programs that support both high school students and college students who are interested in the semiconductor industry, and making sure that they are aware of the semiconductor industry and aware of the various ways they can engage with Micron. So I think that it's something that we continue to work on through our partnership with STEM Connector and other enterprises that are around to try to reach a great group of young people.
So you keep it focused on the area where Micron has a comparative advantage, right?
That's right. It's semiconductors, right? And I think that's important for us because semiconductors make everything run. And so we're working now on some work with folks who have a high school degree and trade school and community college, because there's going to be a significant drop off in semiconductor industry of technicians. And I always tell young people, technicians at Micron often stay in those roles for a long time. From a financial perspective, over the years, many of them make more than college educated engineers without the student debt when you have to take out a student loan, right? So there's a financial benefit for many to do that. And so we spend a lot of time at Micron encouraging young people to think of college as one vehicle to working at Micron, but you don't have to go to college to work at Micron. So we spend a lot of time working with other types of organizations.
And shameless plug for our forthcoming ebook that Micron will be contributing to, that's sponsored by Intel, focused on semiconductors. Big opportunity in that field right now. Micron's building plants all over, and Intel is too, and then all the vendors that they work with, Samsung, Texas Instruments. There's a lot of building going on in that space. Heather, Teresa, on that point about workforce readiness.
Yeah, I'll just make it short. I think from a curriculum standpoint, it's about building habits of mind and creating problem solvers, right? Those habits, STEM habits of mind are really transferable regardless what field you're going to go into. You're teaching kids how to be critical thinkers, how to solve problems, how to collaborate with one another, how to have empathy with one another.
Awesome.
Yep. And creating those opportunities across space and time so that you have a continuous learning journey for one person to continue. So they are able to persist from the time they're in elementary school till the time they're going into college or career, and feeling successful and included.
Amazing. I think that the Angela's question about how can after school programs collaborate with employers, I feel like we've probably answered that through our conversation today. Quick answer, Robert, for you, what do you look for in partners? And we were actually talking about this. That's why.
I actually look for partners that are explicitly committed to young people that have historically been systemically marginalized, right? And so I think that those that have an explicit commitment to those young folks and are willing to have those tough conversations about race, gender identity, thinking about the ways in which women and girls, but also going a layer deeper and having a universal conversation about women and girls, but also thinking about the ways in which in that context and ecosystem, girls of color are twice marginalized, and really thinking about the work intersectionally. So that's what we look for with partners, and definitely want to shout out two of our partners. Steam Truck in Atlanta has been an amazing partner because they take STEM activities to the community and to the block, which is super important considering where we're at. And also want to shout out Yamale and the work that she's doing with STEM from Dance and their new partnership we're building with them in Atlanta at Emory University. So just amazing MIT educated engineer who decided engineering and corporate wasn't for her and decided to follow her passion and chase her dream. And I think that's a theme for young people in STEM, is like chase your dream. And I think that not to quote Puffy on the birthday of Tupac, but I will as a hip hop head, Puffy always said, don't chase the money, chase the dream, right? And I stand by that with young people all the time, like chase the dream, the money will follow.
I totally agree. Somebody told me that when I was growing up, and I could not, follow, do what you're passionate about. And I'm fortunate enough to have been able to follow a career that enables me to be passionate about what I do. And I think all of us share that on the call. So that's a great way to end things today. So happy Pride, happy Juneteenth to everybody. And please feel free to follow up with any of us and look for a follow-up email. We'll be working on including some resources as well as a recording of the webinar. So have a great day, and thank you again to our panel for such a great conversation.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.